The moon hangs full over a silent river, somewhere deep in the Slavic lands. The water reflects silver light while shadows dance between birch trees on the shore. Then you hear it, a sound that freezes the blood. Laughter, high and clear and unmistakably female. It echoes across the water like bells, like music, like a promise. A young man walking home from the village stops. He sees her there in the shallows, pale skin gleaming wet in the moonlight. Long hair, the color of river weeds, flowing around her shoulders. She's beautiful beyond words. She smiles at him. She beckons. He knows he shouldn't approach. His grandmother warned him about nights like this, about women who appear near water when the moon is full. But her smile is so sweet, her voice so gentle as she calls his name. How does she know his name? He takes one step toward the water, then another. The laughter continues, but now there's something else beneath it. Something that sounds less like joy and more like hunger. Her fingers are longer than they should be. Her teeth, when she smiles, are too sharp. The water around her ankles begins to swirl. By morning, they'll find his body tangled in reeds downstream. His face frozen in an expression between ecstasy and terror. The old women will cross themselves and whisper the word, Rusalka. But what is a Rusalka? Ask a Russian peasant from the 19th century, and they might tell you she's the spirit of a drowned maiden seeking revenge on the living. Ask a Ukrainian grandmother, and she'll describe a forest demon who emerges during Rusalka week to punish those who break tradition. Ask a Polish storyteller, and you'll hear about Topielka, the vengeful ghost of an unwed mother who threw herself into a lake. Beautiful maiden with flowing green hair, or terrifying water demon with corpse-pale skin. Innocent victim of violence or ruthless killer of men. Tragic figure deserving pity or dangerous spirit demanding fear. The Rusalka is all of these things and none of them. She is one of the most complex and contradictory figures in Slavic mythology, embodying the collision between ancient pagan water deities and Christian concepts of sin and damnation. She represents the Slavic understanding of boundaries, those thin places where one world bleeds into another. Life and death, water and land, victim and monster. Tonight, we dive deep into the dark waters of Slavic folklore to uncover the truth about the Rusalka. We'll trace her origins from ancient water goddesses to medieval ghost stories. We'll explore how she differs across the Slavic world, from the forests of Russia to the mountains of the Balkans. And we'll ask the question that has haunted Slavic peoples for centuries. Is the Rusalka a drowned maiden deserving our sympathy, or a vengeful demon we should fear? The answer, like the Rusalka herself, exists somewhere between the moonlight and the water. If you're ready to look beyond the veil of forgotten myths and uncover the secrets the world chose to forget, subscribe to Inside Strange Times so you won't miss new journeys into the realm of ancient mysteries. To understand the Rusalka, we must first see her as the Slavic peoples saw her. Not through modern eyes, but through the lens of folklore preserved in countless villages across Eastern Europe. The ethnographic records of the 19th and early 20th centuries give us a window into a world where the Rusalka was not a fairy tale, but a genuine threat. Describing a Rusalka is like trying to capture moonlight in your hands. The details shift depending on who tells the story and where they tell it. But certain features appear again and again across the Slavic lands. Most accounts agree on her overwhelming beauty. She appears as a young woman in the prime of life, her skin pale as death itself, or sometimes tinged with the green of deep water. Russian folklore from the Arkhangelsk region describes her skin as white as birch bark. Ukrainian tales from Poltava province speak of flesh that gleams like polished bone. Her hair is perhaps her most distinctive feature. Long and unbound, it flows around her body like living water. The color varies by region, and perhaps by the nature of her death. In northern Russian accounts, her hair is often described as green, the color of river weeds and algae. Some folklorists recorded that this green tint came from drowning, that the water plants literally grew into her hair in death. Other traditions from Ukraine and Belarus describe hair as black as a moonless night or golden as ripe wheat. A Russian peasant from Ryazan province told the ethnographer Alexander Afanasyev in the 1850s that Rusalki had hair so long it reached their ankles when they stood. They would comb it endlessly with their fingers, sitting on riverbanks under the full moon. The sound of this combing, he said, was like wind through willow branches. The question of whether Rusalki have fishtails or human legs divides Slavic folklore sharply along regional lines. The mermaid image with a fishtail is actually relatively rare in authentic Slavic tradition. It appears most often in areas influenced by Western European folklore or in later literary adaptations. Traditional Slavic Rusalki from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus are almost always described as having human legs. A detailed account from Vladimir province in Russia describes Rusalki as having completely human form, walking on two legs and dancing in meadows. Their feet, however, left no tracks in soft earth. Another tradition holds that their feet point backwards, a common feature of dangerous spirits in Slavic demonology. Her clothing, or lack thereof, also carries significance. Most accounts describe Rusalki as naked or clothed only in their own long hair. This nakedness marked them as shameless, as creatures beyond social norms and Christian modesty. Some traditions from southern Russia and Ukraine describe them wearing white shifts, the funeral garments of unwed maidens. These shifts are always torn and stained with water and mud. Polish folklore occasionally mentions Rusalki, dressed as brides in white gowns and wreaths of flowers. These are specifically the spirits of women who died before their wedding day, still wearing the clothes they hoped to marry in. Her eyes are another point of supernatural terror. Ethnographic records from across the Slavic world describe Rusalka eyes as empty, as hollow as wells. Some accounts say they glow green in darkness like a cat's eyes. Others claim they are completely black with no whites at all. A Belarusian informant in the 1920s told researchers that looking into a Rusalka's eyes was like looking into your own grave. The Rusalka's behavior patterns are remarkably consistent across different Slavic regions. She is a creature of specific times and specific places, bound by rules as rigid as any natural law. She appears most often at night, particularly when the moon is full. Twilight hours are also dangerous. That liminal time between day and night when boundaries weaken. Noon is another perilous moment. The Slavic concept of the noon demon, paludnica, often overlaps with Rusalka traditions. Both are female spirits who appear at boundary times to threaten the unwary. Water is her domain, but not exclusively. Russian Rusalki are found in rivers and lakes and ponds. They particularly favor deep pools and whirlpools, places where the current runs strange. Old mill ponds are especially dangerous. The wheel's constant turning creates a vortex that Rusalki use to drag victims down. But Rusalki are not confined to water. During Rusalka week, the period around the Feast of Trinity in early summer, they leave their watery homes and move into the forests. Ukrainian folklore is especially rich with accounts of Rusalki in the woods during this time. They live in birch trees, swinging from the branches and dancing in clearings. The sound of their laughter echoes through the forest at night. A detailed ethnographic account from Kiev province in the 1880s describes how villagers would avoid certain groves during Rusalka week. One particular stand of birches near the village of Stavisha was known as a Rusalka gathering place. Farmers refused to work their fields nearby. Women wouldn't hang laundry in the area. Children were kept indoors after sunset. The activities of Rusalki follow distinct patterns. They sing, and their singing is supernaturally beautiful. Russian folklore describes Rusalka songs as sweeter than any human voice, capable of drawing men from miles away. The songs have no words in some traditions, just pure melody that bypasses reason and speaks directly to desire. They dance with wild abandon. Round dances called khorovods in Russian are their specialty. They form circles in forest clearings and dance until dawn, their pale bodies moving like mist. Wherever they dance, the grass grows greener or dies completely. The folklore contradicts itself on this point. They comb their hair endlessly. This grooming behavior appears in countless accounts. A Rusalka sits on a riverbank or in a tree combing her long hair with her fingers. Sometimes she uses a comb made of fish bones. The repetitive motion is hypnotic to observers. Most dangerously, they lure men to their deaths. The methods vary, but the outcome is always the same. The Rusalka's murderous techniques are as varied as they are disturbing. Understanding how she kills reveals much about Slavic fears and the symbolic meaning of her existence. Drowning is the most obvious method. she appears near water and calls to passers-by, particularly young men. Her beauty and sweet voice draw them into the shallows. Then she grabs them and drags them down into the depths. Russian folklore from the Volga region describes how Rusalki would wrap their long hair around a victim's throat like a noose. The more he struggled, the tighter the hair constricted. Some accounts describe Rusalki working in groups to drown their prey. A folktale from Smolensk province tells of 3 Rusalki who attacked a merchant crossing a ford. One grabbed his horse's bridle. Another wrapped her arms around his waist. The third pulled him backwards into the water. His body was found 3 days later, 5 miles downstream. But the most distinctive and bizarre method of Rusalka murder is tickling. This appears constantly in Russian and Ukrainian folklore. The Rusalka tickles her victim until he dies of laughter. This sounds absurd to modern ears, but it held genuine terror for Slavic peasants. The ethnographer Dmitry Zelenin recorded multiple accounts in the early 20th century of Rusalki tickling victims to death. A story from Oryol province describes a young man who encountered a Rusalka in the forest during Rusalka week. She chased him through the trees, laughing. When she caught him, she tickled his sides until he couldn't breathe. He died there under a birch tree, his face frozen in a horrible grin. The symbolism of tickling death is complex. It represents a perversion of joy and pleasure. What should be playful becomes lethal. It also suggests the Rusalka's childlike nature in some traditions. She kills not from malice, but from not understanding her own strength, like a child who doesn't know when to stop the game. Some scholars interpret the tickling motif as a folk memory of ancient sacrifice rituals where victims were made to laugh before death. Others see it as symbolizing the helpless laughter of drowning, that horrible sound when water fills the lungs. Seduction leading to madness is another Rusalka tactic. She doesn't always kill directly. Sometimes she appears to a man night after night, drawing him into obsessive love. He wastes away pining for her. He neglects his family, his work, his faith. Eventually, he either throws himself into the water to be with her or simply dies of longing. A Belarusian folk tale tells of a miller who fell in love with a Rusalka. She would appear to him every night at the mill pond. He began staying up all night watching for her. He stopped eating. Within a month, he was a skeleton. His wife found him one morning floating face down in the mill race. Rusalki are not indiscriminate killers. They have preferences. Understanding who they target reveals the social anxieties embedded in their mythology. Young men are the primary victims. Almost every Rusalka tale involves a male victim, usually unmarried. The sexual dimension is impossible to ignore. Rusalki represent dangerous female sexuality, uncontrolled by marriage or social norms. They punish male desire by becoming its object and its destruction. But Rusalki also target women in specific circumstances. Pregnant women are particularly vulnerable. Russian folklore holds that Rusalki envy the living their ability to bear children, since the Rusalka herself died before experiencing motherhood. A pregnant woman who goes near water during Rusalka week risks being dragged down so the Rusalka can steal her unborn child. Ukrainian traditions describe Rusalki who haunt women who are weaving or doing laundry near water. They tangle the thread or steal the washing. If confronted, they attack. There's a gender division here. Men are seduced and drowned, but women are attacked for violating the Rusalka's territory or possessing what she cannot have. Children are sometimes victims, though less commonly than adults. Rusalki might steal children who wander too close to water. In some traditions, these stolen children become Rusalki themselves, joining the unholy company of the drowned. Certain behaviors attract Rusalka attention. Swimming alone at night is asking for death. Bathing during Rusalka week is forbidden. Working on certain holy days, particularly Trinity, brings Rusalka vengeance. A tale from Tver province tells of a farmer who insisted on mowing his hayfield on Trinity Sunday despite his wife's warnings. A Rusalka rose from the nearby stream and chased him through his own field, her laughter echoing across the valley. He barely made it home. Mockery or disrespect toward Rusalki is mortally dangerous. A young man who boasts he doesn't fear them or who makes crude jokes about them becomes a target. The Rusalki will prove him wrong. The Slavic peasant learned to read the landscape for signs of Rusalka activity. Knowing these signs could mean the difference between life and death. Unexplained laughter near water, especially at night, was the most obvious warning. Female voices singing when no women should be present. The sound of someone combing hair, that distinctive rhythmic swishing. Visual signs included unusual mist rising from water on warm nights. Ripples on a pond when there's no wind. Wet footprints leading from water into the forest with no prints returning. Circles of especially green grass in forest clearings marked Rusalka dancing grounds. Some traditions claim these circles are scorched instead, the grass dead, from supernatural contact. Either way, villagers avoided them. Birch trees with broken lower branches suggested Rusalki had been swinging there. Finding a comb made of bone or wood near water was a terrible omen. It meant a Rusalka had been grooming herself nearby. Dead fish floating in unusual numbers indicated Rusalka activity. The water spirits would kill fish in their wild dancing and playing. A pond suddenly choked with dead fish meant Rusalki had taken up residence. Men who became obsessed with visiting a particular pond or stream were suspected of being under Rusalka influence. Their families would watch them carefully, sometimes forcibly preventing them from going near water. These weren't mere superstitions to the Slavic peasant. They were survival knowledge, practical guidelines for navigating a world where the supernatural was as real as rain. The Rusalka we encounter in 19th century folklore is not an original creation. She is a palimpsest, layers of belief written over each other across millennia. To understand her, we must dig down through these layers, peeling back Christian overlay to find the pagan bedrock beneath. Before Christianity came to the Slavic lands, before the baptism of Kievan Rus in 988, Slavic peoples worshipped a pantheon of nature, spirits, and gods. Among these water deities held special power. Water in the Slavic worldview was never simply water. It was a boundary, a threshold between worlds. The ancient Slavs understood that beneath the surface of every river and lake lay another realm. Not our world, but not entirely separate from it either. The earliest layer of water worship we can identify involves unnamed female water spirits. These weren't personal gods with individual names and stories. They were the numinous presence in water itself. Each spring had its spirit. Each river was alive with divine female power. Archaeological evidence from the early medieval period shows votive offerings thrown into water across the Slavic territories. Jewelry and coins and weapons cast into sacred springs and rivers. These offerings weren't for specific named goddesses, but for the female powers residing in the water. The primary chronicle, our main written source for early Rus religion, mentions water spirits only obliquely. Christian monks who compiled these chronicles had no interest in preserving pagan theology. But we catch glimpses, references to Vili and Beregini, female spirits associated with water and fertility. Beregini in particular seem to be ancient protective water spirits. The word comes from bereg, meaning shore or bank. These were the guardians of riverbanks and lake shores. They protected fishermen and blessed boats. They ensured safe crossings at fords. But Beregini had a darker aspect too. They could withhold their protection. A fisherman who didn't show proper respect might find his nets empty. A traveler who failed to make offering before crossing could be swept away by sudden current. The Vili represent another strand of pre-Christian water worship. These female spirits appear across all Slavic cultures under various names: Vili in the south, Wili in Poland, Vilas in the Balkans. Originally, they seem to have been nature spirits with particular connection to water and mountains. South Slavic Vili were beautiful women with long hair who lived near springs and waterfalls. They could control weather and water flow. Offend a vila and she would dry up your well or flood your field. Honor her properly and she would bring rain in drought. These Vili share obvious characteristics with later Rusalki. Both are beautiful water-dwelling women with long hair. Both can be helpful or harmful depending on how they're treated. Both are associated with specific times and places. The connection is clear, but there's a crucial difference. The ancient Vili and Beregini were not ghosts. They were never human. They were immortal nature spirits, as eternal as the waters they inhabited. The Rusalka, by contrast, is usually a transformed human, a dead woman who became a spirit. This transformation from nature deity to human ghost marks Christianity's impact on Slavic water mythology. The Slavic water spirits don't exist in isolation. They're part of a broader Indo-European pattern of female water deities. Examining these parallels helps us understand the ancient roots beneath the Christian overlay. Greek nymphs, particularly naiads, provide the closest parallel. These were water spirits inhabiting springs and rivers and fountains. Beautiful young women with long, flowing hair, dangerous to men who saw them bathing, capable of blessing or cursing. The similarities to Slavic Rusalki are striking. Germanic nixies and nek represent another branch of the same Indo-European tradition. These water spirits of Northern Europe lure travelers to watery deaths. They appear as beautiful women combing their hair. They sing songs of supernatural sweetness. The parallels write themselves. Celtic traditions preserve similar figures. The Irish Merrow and the Scottish Selkie share characteristics with Slavic Rusalki. All are female water spirits associated with transformation and danger. All occupy the boundary between human and supernatural worlds. Even in distant India, we find the apsaras, celestial water nymphs who seduce and sometimes destroy mortal men. The core pattern repeats: beautiful female spirit plus water plus danger to men equals a widespread Indo-European archetype. Comparative mythology suggests this pattern goes back to Proto-Indo-European religion itself. The reconstruction is speculative, but scholars propose an original water goddess or class of water spirits, female divine powers inhabiting waters and controlling fertility. The ancient Indo-Europeans were pastoral peoples who depended on water for their herds and crops. Water sources were sacred by necessity, and in their worldview, sacred power was often conceptualized as female. The Earth Mother gives birth to crops. Water nourishes like milk. Female divinity and natural fertility intertwined. When Indo-European peoples spread across Europe and Asia, they carried this archetype with them. Each culture adapted it to local conditions. The Greeks made their nymphs relatively benign. The Germanic peoples emphasized danger and death. The Slavs developed their own synthesis. But underneath the local variations, the pattern persists. Beautiful woman, long hair, water-dwelling, power over fertility and death. The Rusalka is the Slavic expression of an idea as old as the Indo-European family itself. When Christianity spread through Slavic lands between the 9th and 13th centuries, it encountered these ancient water spirits. The Church couldn't eliminate beliefs that had existed for millennia. Instead, it transformed them. The key transformation was reinterpreting immortal nature spirits as mortal human ghosts. What had been divine became demonic. What had been eternal became tragically temporary. Christian theology had no place for neutral nature spirits. Everything was either created by God and therefore good, or opposed to God and therefore evil. The old water goddesses couldn't be good because they weren't Christian. Therefore, they must be evil. But folk belief resisted complete demonization. The people still needed to explain water spirits who helped fishermen and blessed crops. The solution was to make them human. Not demons, but the souls of the dead. This created the classic Rusalka, not an immortal goddess, but a drowned woman who couldn't rest. The beauty and danger remained, but now they came from human tragedy rather than divine nature. Medieval Russian church texts reveal this transformation in progress. 11th and 12th century sermons condemn peasants for making offerings to Biragini and Vili. By the 14th century, these same texts mention Rusalki instead, spirits of drowned women rather than nature goddesses. The church also imposed its own calendar over pagan seasonal celebrations. The ancient Slavic water spirit festivals occurred around the summer solstice, the time of maximum solar power and life force. Christianity moved these celebrations to Trinity Week, 7 weeks after Easter. Rusalka Week, as it came to be called, occupied the week after Trinity. It preserved the timing and many customs of the old pagan water festivals. But now it was framed in Christian terms, not celebrating nature spirits, but warding off evil ghosts. This syncretism, this blending of pagan and Christian elements, created the Rusalka as we know her from folklore. Ancient enough to remember goddess worship, Christian enough to be a tortured soul. The perfect symbol of Slavic religious history. Christian influence added specific categories of the dead who became Rusalki. This created a more complex mythology than simple nature worship. Now, there were reasons why a woman became a Rusalka. Stories explaining the transformation. Drowned women form the primary category. But not just any drowned woman. The manner and circumstances of death mattered enormously. A woman who drowned by accident might or might not become a Rusalka, depending on regional tradition. But a woman who drowned herself by suicide almost certainly would. Suicide violated Christian law and prevented proper burial in consecrated ground. The soul couldn't rest. It remained bound to the place of death. Why did young women commit suicide by drowning? The folklore is brutally clear. Seduction and abandonment. A girl who gave herself to a man before marriage and then found herself pregnant and abandoned had few options in traditional Slavic society. The shame was unbearable. Her family might cast her out. No one would marry her. Death in the river seemed preferable to life as a ruined woman. Ukrainian folklore particularly emphasizes this narrative. The Rusalka is a victim of male betrayal. Her murderous nature in death mirrors the violence done to her in life. She was destroyed by male desire. Now she destroys men in return. Polish traditions about topialis, drowned maidens, follow the same pattern. A girl seduced by a nobleman or a wealthy merchant, promised marriage then abandoned. suicide in the mill pond. Transformation into a vengeful spirit who drowns men crossing the ford. These aren't just stories. They reflect social reality in pre-modern Slavic society. Female suicide by drowning was tragically common. The rivers literally were full of drowned girls. The mythology transformed this social tragedy into supernatural threat. Murdered women, especially those killed by lovers or husbands, also became Rusalki. A man who killed his pregnant lover to hide the scandal. A husband who drowned his wife to marry another. These victims couldn't rest. They returned as Rusalki seeking justice. Unchristened babies form another category in some regional traditions. Infants who died before baptism couldn't enter heaven according to Christian doctrine. Their souls wandered. In some areas of Russia and Ukraine, these unbaptized infants were believed to become Rusalki. This created especially tragic Rusalki, children eternally trapped between life and death. Some traditions hold that Rusalki cry at night for the mothers they lost. Others say they seek to steal living children to ease their loneliness. Women who died in childbirth also joined the ranks of Rusalki in certain regions. Death in childbirth was common and terrifying. A woman who died bringing life into the world existed in a state of profound contradiction. This liminal status made her a prime candidate for transformation into a spirit. The Rusalka belongs to a broader Slavic category called zalozhnye in Russian, literally the laid down or stored away dead. These are people who died wrong deaths and couldn't rest properly. The concept of zalozhnye is ancient and pre-Christian, though it absorbed Christian elements over time. It represents the Slavic understanding that how you die matters as much as how you live. A good death in Slavic tradition meant dying at home surrounded by family after living a full life. It meant receiving proper funeral rites and burial in consecrated ground. It meant your descendants would remember you and pray for your soul. A bad death was the opposite. Sudden and violent. Away from home and family. Without last rites or confession. Burial in unconsecrated ground or no burial at all. Being forgotten by the living. Zalozhnye included suicides, murder victims, those who died drunk, unbaptized children, sorcerers, witches, anyone whose death violated social or religious norms. These unfortunates became dangerous spirits who haunted the living. Rusalki are female zalozhnye specifically associated with water, but they share characteristics with other categories of unquiet dead. All are restless. All are dangerous. All exist in a liminal state between life and complete death. The social function of this belief system becomes clear when we examine it closely. The zalozhnye mythology enforced social norms. Don't commit suicide because you'll become a dangerous spirit. Don't die drunk because you'll haunt your family. Baptize your children immediately lest they die and become demons. It also provided explanation for tragedy and misfortune. When a young man drowned mysteriously, when a woman died in childbirth, when children sickened and died, the Rusalki provided an explanation. Not random chance, but supernatural agency. Not God's will, but demonic attack. Understanding why Rusalki are specifically water spirits requires understanding Slavic cosmology. Water wasn't just a physical substance. It was a metaphysical boundary. Ancient Slavic worldview divided reality into 3 levels. The upper world of sky and gods, the middle world of earth and humans, the lower world of water and the dead. Water literally formed the floor of the human world. Beneath every river and lake lay the entrance to the other world. The dead had to cross water to reach their final destination. Springs emerged from the underworld, bringing its power into our realm. This explains why water was sacred and dangerous simultaneously. Every pond and stream was a gateway. Things could come through from the other side, and the living could slip through into that dark realm. Drowning wasn't simply dying. It was crossing the boundary between worlds while still alive. The drowned person existed in both realms at once. Not quite living, but not completely dead. This liminal existence created the Rusalka. Folk rituals preserved this understanding. When crossing water, travelers made the sign of the cross or spoke protective prayers. Bridges required special blessings because they violated the boundary. Wells needed consecration to prevent dark powers emerging from below. Even the Russian word for baptism, kresheny, shares roots with crest, meaning cross and crossing. Baptism involves crossing through water from the devil's kingdom into God's kingdom. The symbolism of water as boundary runs deep in Slavic Christian practice. Rusalki inhabit this boundary by their very nature. They died in water and became part of it. They can cross between worlds. This makes them profoundly dangerous. They belong to neither realm completely. They are threshold creatures. And thresholds are always perilous. The agricultural calendar reinforced water's boundary status. Spring floods marked the transition from death of winter to life of summer. Rivers breaking their ice was the earth coming back to life. But floods also destroyed, washing away homes and drowning livestock. Water gave life and took it. Creation and destruction flowed together. Rusalka week occurred precisely at the height of spring's transformative power. Nature exploding with life. Crops growing rapidly. The world transitioning from planting to growing season. At this moment of maximum transformation, the boundary between worlds grew thin. The Rusalki could cross over. This wasn't random superstition. It was sophisticated symbolic thinking about life, death, and the forces that govern both. The Rusalka embodied these forces in female form. Beautiful because life is beautiful. Deadly because death is inevitable. connected to water because water is where transformation happens. Every drowned girl who became a Rusalka was a reminder. The boundary is thin. Cross it carelessly, and you might not return. The water holds powers older than Christianity, older than the Slavs themselves. Powers that remember when they were worshipped as goddesses and resent being reduced to the ghosts of suicidal maidens. The Slavic world stretches from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, from the Elbe River to the Ural Mountains. Across this vast territory, dozens of distinct peoples speak related languages and share common cultural roots. Yet their Rusalki are not identical. Each region shaped the archetype according to local conditions and beliefs. Understanding these regional variations reveals the Rusalka's adaptability. She is not a fixed figure, but a living tradition that evolved differently in different places. What remains constant across all variations is her essential nature, female spirit of water and death born from tragedy. Russian Rusalka traditions are perhaps the most extensively documented, thanks to 19th century ethnographic collecting by scholars like Vladimir Dal and Alexander Afanasyev. The Russian Rusalka combines elements from both northern forest cultures and southern agricultural traditions. In northern Russia, particularly in the Arkhangelsk and Vologda regions, Rusalki were understood primarily as forest spirits. Yes, they originated in water through drowning, but their primary activity occurred in the woods. During Rusalka week, they left the rivers and took up residence in birch trees. A detailed account collected in Vologda province in 1873 describes Rusalki as pale women with streaming green hair who lived in birch groves. At night, they would swing from the branches, calling to passers-by. Their voices sounded like children laughing. Men who approached would be seized and tickled to death. The birch tree connection runs deep in Russian Rusalka lore. Birches were sacred to ancient Slavic peoples, associated with femininity and spring renewal. Their white bark resembled pale skin. Their drooping branches moved like long hair in wind. They were the natural home for female water spirits during their terrestrial phase. Southern Russian traditions from Ryazan and Tambov provinces emphasize the Rusalka as drowned maiden more explicitly. Here the suicide narrative dominates. A girl betrayed by her lover drowns herself in the mill pond. She becomes a Rusalka who haunts that specific location. Local people know which ponds have Rusalki and avoid them. One particularly detailed story comes from Tambov province in the 1880s. A merchant's daughter named Maria fell in love with a traveling salesman. He promised marriage, then disappeared. When she discovered she was pregnant, shame drove her to drown herself in the pond behind her father's mill. That very night, fishermen reported hearing a woman singing by the water. Within a month, 3 men had drowned in that pond under mysterious circumstances. The villagers knew it was Maria's spirit seeking revenge. They stopped using that mill. 20 years later, when the ethnographer recorded the story, people still avoided the pond. they could still hear singing on quiet nights. Russian Rusalki were believed to be most active at noon and midnight. The noon danger connected them to Poludnitsa, the noon demon of Slavic folklore. Both appeared as dangerous women during the midday heat. Both punished people who worked when they should rest. The midnight activity linked Rusalki to the broader category of nocturnal demons. Russian folk belief held that midnight opened portals between worlds. Dead souls could move more freely. Rusalki emerged from their watery homes to dance and sing and hunt. Physical descriptions of Russian Rusalki emphasized their deathly pallor. They were white as snow or corpses. Their bodies were always wet, even when far from water. They left puddles wherever they walked. Their eyes were empty or glowing green. Their laughter was beautiful and terrible. Some Russian traditions held that Rusalki could appear as old hags rather than beautiful maidens. This variation occurred most often in tales where the Rusalka had been dead for many years. Beauty faded even in death. The lovely drowned girl became a withered horror. Ukrainian Rusalka traditions are distinct enough to warrant their own category. In many parts of Ukraine, the preferred term is not Rusalka, but mavka. This word comes from Nav, the Slavic term for the realm of the dead. A mavka is literally a creature from Nav. Ukrainian mavki are more closely associated with forests than Russian Rusalki. They live in trees during Rusalka week, particularly willows and birches near streams. But they also inhabit dense forest groves far from any water. The physical description of mavki includes a distinctive and disturbing detail. When viewed from behind, a mavka appears hollow. You can see through her back as if she has no internal organs. Only her front appears solid and beautiful. This detail appears repeatedly in Ukrainian folklore from different regions. The symbolism is powerful. The mavka is literally hollow, lacking the inner life that defines humanity. She is all surface with nothing beneath. Beautiful facade concealing emptiness. This makes her simultaneously pitiable and horrifying. Ukrainian traditions strongly emphasize the mavka as a victim. She was wronged in life and cannot rest in death. Ethnographic collections from Poltava and Kiev provinces in the late 19th century consistently portray mavki as tragic figures. They weep for their lost lives. They seek the lovers who betrayed them. Their violence stems from sorrow, not inherent evil. A folk song collected in Podolia region tells of a mavka who appears at her former lover's wedding. She stands outside the church weeping. When the groom exits after the ceremony, she calls his name. He recognizes the voice of the girl he seduced and abandoned, the girl who drowned herself pregnant with his child. He dies of terror on the church steps. This sympathetic portrayal doesn't make Ukrainian mavki less dangerous. They still drown men and tickle victims to death. They still steal children and ruin crops. But the motivation is understandable. They are wronged women seeking justice in the only way available to the dead. Rusalka week in Ukraine, called Rusalnytsia, included elaborate rituals for placating mavki. Women would leave offerings of bread and embroidered cloths near water and in forest groves. These gifts acknowledged the mavki's suffering and asked them to leave the living in peace. The timing of Rusalnytsia varied slightly by region, but generally fell in the week after Trinity. This was the most dangerous time of year. Mavki were at their strongest. Their power to harm reached its peak. Villagers took elaborate precautions we'll explore in the next section. Ukrainian folklore also includes the concept of mavki as protectors of nature. They punish people who damage forests or pollute streams. A woodcutter who cuts down a sacred tree might find himself chased by angry mavki. This ecological dimension appears less prominently in Russian Rusalka lore. Polish water spirit traditions use several terms. Rusalka appears in some regions clearly borrowed from Eastern neighbors, but the most distinctive Polish term is topielka, from topić, meaning to drown. Polish topielis are almost exclusively the spirits of drowned maidens, particularly those who died before marriage. The bride imagery is central. Many accounts describe topielis wearing white dresses and flower wreaths, the traditional attire of Polish brides. Folklore from the Mazovia region, recorded in the early 20th century, tells of topielis who drowned on their wedding day. Perhaps the bride fell into a river while traveling to the church. Perhaps she was murdered by a rival. Perhaps she discovered her betrothed's infidelity and threw herself into the water, still wearing her wedding gown. These bridal topielis are particularly vengeful. They were denied marriage, the defining moment of a woman's life in traditional society. They died on the threshold of fulfillment. This makes them bitter and dangerous. They appear near churches where weddings occur. They watch wedding processions from riverbanks. Sometimes they try to join the celebration. A beautiful woman in a white dress appears among the wedding guests. But her dress is wet and her skin is cold. She leaves puddles where she stands. When someone recognizes her as a topielka, she vanishes with a terrible scream. Polish folklore includes detailed accounts of topielka behavior. They comb their long hair sitting on mill wheels. They wash phantom wedding clothes in streams at midnight. They sing laments for their lost futures. The songs are heartbreakingly sad. But topielis also kill. They drag men into water, particularly men traveling to their own weddings. If the topielka cannot have marriage, neither can others. A folktale from Krakow province tells of a topielka who drowned 7 grooms in one summer. Each man was found floating in the same mill pond, his face peaceful as if sleeping. Some Polish traditions hold that topielis can be saved through prayer and proper burial. If someone retrieves the body of a drowned maiden and ensures she receives Christian burial, her spirit can rest. This offers hope absent from Russian and Ukrainian traditions, where Rusalki are eternally damned. The Catholic Church's influence on Polish folklore is evident here. The possibility of redemption through proper ritual reflects Catholic theology more than Orthodox or earlier pagan belief. Yet the underlying archetype remains distinctly Slavic. Czech and Slovak traditions use terms like vodnik for male water spirits and vodnis or vodianica for female ones. These water spirits share characteristics with Eastern Slavic Rusalki, but with distinct Central European flavor. Czech vodnis are described as women with long green hair who live in ponds and streams. They wear green dresses that are always dripping wet. Unlike Russian Rusalki, they are rarely naked. This may reflect greater Western European influence on Czech folklore. The Czech vodnis keep souls of drowned people trapped in overturned pots beneath the water. This macabre detail appears frequently in Czech folklore collected during the 19th century. Each pot contains a soul. The vodnis guards these pots jealously. She will not release them. Slovak traditions describe vodnis as beautiful women who appear near water asking travelers for help. They might ask someone to carry them across a stream. The helpful traveler picks up the woman and steps into the water. Immediately, she becomes impossibly heavy. She drags him down to drown. This motif of false helplessness appears across Slavic folklore, but is particularly prominent in Slovak tales. Both Czech and Slovak traditions include protective charms against vodnis. Carrying bread and salt protects against water spirits. These substances represent hospitality and divine blessing. A vodnis cannot harm someone bearing these sacred items. The timing of vodnis activity differs slightly from Eastern traditions. While Russian and Ukrainian Rusalki are most dangerous during Rusalka week after Trinity, Czech and Slovak vodnis pose threats year-round. They are particularly active during storms when rivers flood. Rushing water strengthens them. Some Czech tales portray vodnis almost sympathetically. A story from Moravia tells of a vodnis who fell in love with a human man. She appeared to him as a normal woman. They courted for months. Only when he proposed marriage did she reveal her true nature. She had to refuse him. Water spirits cannot marry mortals. She returned to her pond weeping. This romantic element appears less often in Eastern Slavic Rusalka lore. Russian and Ukrainian Rusalki seduce and destroy. Czech vodnis sometimes genuinely love. The difference may reflect the influence of Germanic romantic traditions on Czech culture. South Slavic traditions from Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, and Bulgaria preserve perhaps the oldest forms of Slavic water spirit belief. The vila, plural vile, combines characteristics of Rusalki with those of mountain and storm spirits. Vilas are not exclusively water spirits. They inhabit mountains and clouds as well as streams and springs. This broader domain suggests their more ancient origins as general nature spirits rather than specifically drowned women. Serbian folklore describes vilas as beautiful women with long hair that reaches the ground. They wear white dresses and can transform into swans or snakes or whirlwinds. This shape-shifting ability sets them apart from northern Rusalki, who maintain consistent form. Vilas control weather and water flow. They can bring rain or drought. They protect springs and punish those who pollute water sources. A vila might curse an entire village if someone fouls her spring. Crops would fail and livestock would sicken until proper apologies and offerings restored her favor. But vilas also have the seductive and deadly characteristics of Rusalki. They appear to shepherds in mountain pastures. They dance in moonlight near waterfalls. They lure men to their deaths through beauty and enchantment. Bulgarian traditions include the samodiva, essentially identical to the Serbian vila. Samodivi dance in forest clearings and near springs. They are fierce warriors who ride on deer and hunt with bows. This martial aspect is unique to South Slavic traditions. The samodiva can bless or curse. A shepherd who shares his food with a samodiva might find his flocks thriving. But a man who spies on samodivi bathing will be struck mad or killed. They guard their privacy absolutely. South Slavic traditions preserve the strongest connection to pre-Christian goddess worship. Vilas and samodivi are not ghosts of drowned women. They are immortal supernatural beings who existed before humans and will exist after. This sets them apart from the Christianized Rusalki of Russia and Ukraine. Yet, even in the Balkans, Christian influence appears. Some Serbian tales claim vilas are the souls of unbaptized girls or women who died before marriage. This represents the same transformation we see in northern traditions, immortal nature spirits becoming mortal ghosts. But the older layer remains visible. Belarusian Rusalka traditions deserve special attention because they preserve unique elements not found elsewhere. Belarus is a land of vast swamps and endless forests. This landscape shapes local supernatural beliefs. Belarusian Rusalki are strongly associated with swamps rather than rivers. They inhabit the treacherous marshlands that cover much of the country. These swamp Rusalki are more frightening than their riverine cousins. They emerge from stagnant water covered in mud and leeches. A folk account from Minsk province recorded in 1920 describes a swamp Rusalka as having black teeth and fingers like twigs. Her hair was matted with algae. She smelled of rot and decay. This is far from the beautiful seductress of Russian folklore. Belarusian traditions also emphasize Rusalki as child stealers. They emerge from swamps at twilight, seeking unbaptized infants. Mothers must keep babies inside during dangerous hours. A child left outside risks being taken by Rusalki and drowned in the marsh. The protective rituals against Belarusian Rusalki are correspondingly intense. Painting crosses on doors and windows, hanging bundles of marsh marigold over thresholds, never speaking the word Rusalka aloud during their active season. These precautions reveal genuine fear. Yet Belarusian folklore also preserves sympathetic elements. Some tales portray Rusalki as lonely creatures seeking human contact. They don't want to kill. They simply don't understand their own strength. Like children, they play too roughly, and their playmates die. Despite regional variations, certain patterns repeat across all Slavic Rusalka traditions. These commonalities reveal the archetype's essential nature. All traditions agree Rusalki are female spirits associated with water. The specific water source varies: rivers, ponds, lakes, swamps, springs, but water remains central. All Rusalki have long hair that plays important symbolic and practical roles. They use it to drown victims or to seduce with its beauty. All traditions connect Rusalki to untimely death, particularly of young women. Whether immortal nature spirits or drowned maidens, they represent female life cut short. All are dangerous to men, especially young men. The sexual dimension of threat appears universally. All traditions place Rusalka activity at specific times, boundary moments like midnight and noon, and boundary seasons like the transition from spring to summer. Temporal liminality matches their spatial liminality at water's edge, but the differences reveal how local conditions shape mythology. Northern forest peoples emphasized birch trees and woodland activity. Southern agricultural communities focused on mill ponds and irrigation canals. Mountain peoples in the Balkans connected water spirits to weather and storms. Swamp dwellers of Belarus created marsh demons to match their landscape. The degree of Christian overlay also varies regionally. Russian and Ukrainian traditions are heavily Christianized, with detailed explanations of how suicide and improper burial create Rusalki. South Slavic traditions preserve more pagan elements, with vilas as immortal nature beings. Polish traditions add Catholic concepts of redemption through proper burial. These regional variations prove the Rusalka is not a static myth, but a living tradition that evolved to meet local needs. Each Slavic people shaped the archetype while preserving its essential core. The result is a rich tapestry of belief spanning centuries and thousands of miles. Understanding Rusalki requires understanding the calendar of fear and appeasement that governed Slavic peasant life. Rusalki were not constant threats. Their power waxed and waned with the seasons, and there was 1 week each year when their power reached its terrifying peak. Rusalka week, called Rusalnaya Nedelya in Russian and Rusalnitsia in Ukrainian, occurred in early summer. The exact timing varied by region, but generally fell during the week after Trinity Sunday, which itself comes 7 weeks after Easter. This placed Rusalka week in late May or early June, depending on when Easter occurred in any given year. The timing was no accident. This period coincides with the peak of spring's transformative power in the agricultural calendar. By late May, winter's grip has fully released. Fields are planted and crops are growing rapidly. Trees have leafed out completely. Rivers have settled after spring flooding. Nature is at a moment of maximum vitality and change. In pre-Christian times, this period marked the celebration of the summer solstice and the triumph of life over death. When Christianity arrived, it overlaid these ancient celebrations with the Feast of Trinity. But the pagan elements remained beneath the surface. During Rusalka week, the boundary between the living and dead grew dangerously thin. Rusalki emerged from their watery homes with unprecedented freedom. They could move onto land. They could inhabit forests and fields. Their power to harm reached its annual maximum. Ethnographic accounts from across the Slavic world describe the dramatic changes Rusalka week brought to village life. Normal activities ceased. Prohibitions and taboos governed every aspect of daily existence. The week became a time of collective vigilance against supernatural threat. A detailed description from Tambov province in Russia, collected in 1892, illustrates the extent of these restrictions. During Rusalka, weak villagers would not bathe in rivers or ponds under any circumstances. They would not work in fields near water. They avoided forests, particularly birch groves, after sunset. Women would not do laundry or draw water alone. Children were kept inside from dusk to dawn. The prohibitions extended to agricultural work. No one would sow grain during Rusalka week. The Rusalki might curse the seeds. No one would cut hay in low meadows near streams. Mowers risked encountering Rusalki in the grass. Ukrainian traditions added specific prohibitions around weaving and spinning. Women would not work with thread or cloth during Rusalnitsia. The Rusalki might tangle the threads or steal the fabric. This prohibition connected to ancient beliefs about Rusalki as spinners of fate. The connection between Trinity Sunday and Rusalka week reveals the complex layering of Christian and pagan elements in Slavic folk religion. Trinity celebrates the Christian doctrine of God as three persons. It commemorates the descent of the Holy Spirit on the apostles. Theologically, it has nothing to do with water spirits or drowned maidens. Yet, in Slavic practice, Trinity Sunday absorbed the timing and many customs of ancient summer solstice celebrations. These pre-Christian festivals honored nature spirits and celebrated the peak of the agricultural year. Female water deities featured prominently in these ancient rites. The Church couldn't eliminate these deeply rooted celebrations. Instead, it transformed them. Ancient goddess worship became veneration of the Holy Trinity. Offerings to water spirits became decorating churches with greenery. Dances honoring nature became processions singing Christian hymns. But the old beliefs persisted beneath the Christian surface. Villagers might attend Trinity services in the morning and leave offerings for Rusalki in the evening. They saw no contradiction. Both rituals were necessary for ensuring safety and prosperity. Trinity Sunday itself involved bringing fresh birch branches into homes and churches. This practice predated Christianity by centuries. Birch branches represented the power of spring and growth. They also connected directly to Rusalka beliefs, since Rusalki inhabited birches. Bringing branches indoors symbolically brought that power under control. The most dramatic ritual of Rusalka week was the ceremonial expulsion of Rusalki from village lands. This occurred at the end of the week, marking the return to normal life. The ritual varied regionally but followed similar patterns across the Slavic world. In Russian villages, the ceremony often involved creating an effigy called the Rusalka. Women would make a figure from straw or cloth dressed in white. This effigy represented all the Rusalki who had haunted the village during their week of power. The entire village would process to the edge of the settlement, carrying the effigy. They sang special songs commanding the Rusalki to leave. The lyrics collected from various regions are remarkably similar. They acknowledge the Rusalki's power, but firmly tell them their time is over. One song, recorded in Voronezh province, goes, "We honored you, Rusalki. We fed you. We gave you gifts. Now go back to your waters, go back to your forests. Your week is ended, your time is past. Leave our fields, leave our homes, leave our children in peace." At the village boundary, they would destroy the effigy. Some communities tore it apart and scattered the pieces. Others threw it into a river or stream. Still others burned it and buried the ashes. The destruction symbolized the definitive end of Rusalka power for another year. Ukrainian traditions included a variant where young women dressed in white would play the role of Rusalki. They would run through the village, laughing and chasing people. Then the whole community would chase them out of town, symbolically expelling the Rusalki. This ritualized play transformed terror into celebration. After the expulsion ceremony, restrictions lifted. People could bathe and work and travel freely. The danger had passed. Life returned to normal until next spring, when the cycle would begin again. Beyond the communal rituals, individuals carried personal protection against Rusalki. An extensive tradition of protective magic developed across the Slavic world. Wormwood, called pollen in Russian, was the most powerful anti-Rusalka herb. Its bitter smell and taste repelled water spirits. During Rusalka week, people would carry sprigs of wormwood in their pockets and tuck it into their belts. Women braided it into their hair. Some villages hung wormwood bundles over every door and window. The power of wormwood against Rusalki appears in countless folk accounts. A story from Pskov province tells of a man who forgot his wormwood sprig when going to check his nets. A Rusalka emerged from the water and chased him. He barely escaped. His neighbor, who carried wormwood, fished the same waters without incident. Garlic provided similar protection. Eating garlic before going near water during dangerous times created a shield Rusalki couldn't penetrate. The ethnographer Zelenin recorded that some fishermen would rub garlic on their boats before launching during Rusalka week. Christian symbols offered protection, though their effectiveness was debated in folk tradition. Wearing a cross helped but wasn't absolute. Saying prayers, particularly the Jesus prayer, provided a barrier against Rusalka attack. but folk wisdom held that these Christian protections worked best when combined with older pagan methods like wormwood. Iron was protective against all supernatural beings, including Rusalki. Carrying an iron knife or having iron tools nearby kept water spirits at bay. This belief connects to ancient Indo-European traditions where iron represented human civilization's triumph over nature. Salt and bread, the fundamental elements of hospitality, had protective power. A traveler carrying salt and bread could not be harmed by Rusalki. These substances represented the sacred bonds of community and civilization. Rusalki, as outside beings, couldn't violate these bonds. Some regions had unique protective practices. In parts of Belarus, people would turn their clothes inside out when near water during dangerous times. This confused Rusalki, who couldn't recognize their intended victims. In southern Russia, making loud noises, clapping or shouting, would drive Rusalki away. They feared human voices raised in confidence. Protection wasn't only about repelling Rusalki. Sometimes appeasing them was wiser than fighting them. A tradition of offerings developed to placate these dangerous spirits. Food offerings were common. During Rusalka week, women would leave bread and salt near rivers and springs. Sometimes they included honey or porridge. These gifts acknowledged the Rusalki's hunger and suffering. Hungry ghosts are more dangerous than fed ones. Cloth and clothing offerings appear frequently in Ukrainian and Belarusian traditions. Women would leave embroidered towels hanging on branches near water. Rusalki, who died naked, supposedly appreciated these gifts. The offerings might prevent attacks. Some communities threw wreaths of flowers into rivers during Rusalka week. These wreaths represented the bridal crowns Rusalki never wore in life. Giving them symbolically what they lost might ease their anger. Libations of water or milk poured onto the ground near springs honored local Rusalki. The liquid sank into the earth, returning to the underground waters where Rusalki dwelled. This reciprocal exchange, humans give to Rusalki, who gives safety in return, maintained cosmic balance. The attitude toward these offerings was complex. They weren't worship in the Christian sense. The church condemned them as pagan superstition, but villagers saw them as practical measures, not so different from locking doors against thieves. You acknowledge the threat and take reasonable precautions. Beyond active protection, an elaborate system of taboos governed behavior during dangerous times. These prohibitions defined what not to do to avoid attracting Rusalka attention. Never swim alone, especially at night or during Rusalka week. This taboo was absolute across all Slavic cultures. Solitary swimmers were Rusalka's preferred victims. Going in groups offered some protection. Don't answer if you hear your name called near water at night. It might be a Rusalka mimicking human speech. Once you respond, she has power over you. This belief appears in Russian, Ukrainian, and Polish folklore. Never look at your reflection in water during dangerous times. the reflection might not be yours. A Rusalka might appear in the water behind you, or you might see her instead of yourself, indicating she has claimed your soul. Avoid stepping on wet grass barefoot during Rusalka week. Rusalki dance in meadows at night, leaving the grass soaked with dew. Stepping in their footprints invites possession or madness. Don't whistle near water. Whistling attracts Rusalki, like calling to them. This prohibition was especially strict for women. Female whistling near water during Rusalka week was considered suicidally reckless. Never wash clothes in rivers during the dangerous week. Rusalki might steal the clothes or the washerwomen themselves. Women doing laundry presented particular targets because they were alone near water, engaged in traditionally female work. Despite all precautions, encounters happened. Folklore preserved wisdom about surviving when prevention failed. If you see a Rusalka, don't run. Running triggers the chase instinct. Instead, back away slowly while holding out wormwood or making the sign of the cross. Keep your eyes on her, but don't meet her gaze directly. If a Rusalka calls your name, respond with your baptismal name, not your familiar name. Using the Christian name invokes God's protection. This might break her spell. If caught by a Rusalka and being tickled, try to say a prayer. Even a single word like Lord might make her release you. Failing that, laugh with her. Don't resist. Some accounts claim Rusalki release victims who laugh willingly rather than fighting. If you find yourself in water being dragged down, grab onto anything solid. Reed, roots, submerged, logs, anything. Rusalki are strong, but if you anchor yourself, they may give up and seek easier prey. Wake up immediately if you dream of a beautiful woman in water calling you. Such dreams are Rusalka sendings, attempts to draw you to water while sleepwalking. Tell no one about the dream, lest speaking of it give it power. Remarkably, these beliefs and practices survived well into the 20th century in rural Slavic communities. Ethnographic fieldwork conducted in the 1920s and 30s found active Rusalka traditions. Zelenin's expeditions to northern Russia in the 1920s documented villages where Rusalka week was still observed. Farmers still avoided certain fields. Women still left offerings near springs. The expulsion ritual still occurred, though somewhat abbreviated. Ukrainian ethnographers in the 1930s found Rusalnitsia celebrations continuing in remote villages. Young women still danced as Rusalki in ritual processions. The prohibitions against bathing and fieldwork remained in force. Even as late as the 1960s, Soviet ethnographers, documenting disappearing traditions, found elderly informants who remembered Rusalka week from their youth. These memories preserve details of rituals last performed in the early 20th century. The persistence of these beliefs reveals their deep cultural roots. They weren't mere fairy tales. They were functional belief systems that helped communities navigate environmental and social dangers. Rusalka lore taught water safety, regulated sexual behavior, enforced work taboos, and maintained communal cohesion through shared ritual. When modernization finally did erode these beliefs, it happened rapidly. Collectivization destroyed traditional village structure. Soviet atheism suppressed religious and folk practices. Mass education introduced scientific explanations for natural phenomena. Within a generation, beliefs that had persisted for centuries faded from active practice. But they never disappeared entirely. The Rusalka survived in folk tales and songs, in artistic representations and literary works, in the collective memory of Slavic peoples who still recognize her image, even if they no longer fear her power. The Rusalka has inhabited Slavic imagination for millennia. From ancient water goddesses to medieval ghosts, to romantic literary figures, to modern horror movie monsters, she has adapted and survived. But beneath every transformation, the essential archetype remains. She is the beautiful woman who is also death, the victim who becomes the killer, the boundary between elements and states of being. She embodies contradictions that human consciousness struggles to reconcile. The Rusalka represents specifically female tragedy transformed into female power. The girl betrayed by her lover becomes a spirit who destroys men. The maiden denied marriage haunts those who achieve it. The woman who died giving life steals life from the living. Her vengeance is terrible but understandable. She suffered injustice in life and rectifies it through supernatural means. This makes her simultaneously sympathetic and terrifying. We pity her fate even as we fear her retribution. She deserves compassion but offers none. This moral complexity distinguishes the Rusalka from simpler monster archetypes. Water provides the perfect symbolic medium for this archetype. Water is essential for life, but can kill instantly. It appears calm but hides deadly currents. It reflects the world above while concealing the depths below. The Rusalka emerges from these depths, carrying all water's contradictions in female form. The archetype proved adaptable enough to survive massive cultural shifts. When Christianity arrived, it transformed pagan goddesses into Christian ghosts. When Romanticism emerged, it made the Rusalka a tragic heroine. When feminism developed, it reinterpreted her as a symbol of female rage against patriarchal violence. Each era finds new meaning in the ancient image. Yet something essential persists across all these transformations. The pale woman with long hair standing at the water's edge, the sound of female laughter echoing across a moonlit river, the recognition that beauty and death are sometimes the same thing. These elements transcend time and ideology. Perhaps the Rusalka endures because she speaks to fundamental human experiences, desire and its dangers, the fragility of life, the permeability of boundaries we imagine are solid, the persistence of the dead in memory and landscape. These themes remain relevant regardless of technology or social organization. The Slavic peoples who created and sustained the Rusalka myth understood something profound about the relationship between culture and nature. They knew that water must be respected and feared. They recognized that death, particularly untimely death, leaves a mark on the world. They understood that women denied justice in life might seek it through other means. Modern, rational consciousness dismisses Rusalki as superstition. No educated person believes drowned maidens haunt rivers. Yet, the archetype survives because it captures truths reason cannot fully explain. The Rusalka reminds us the world contains mysteries and dangers our science hasn't tamed. That beneath civilization's surface, older powers still move. Standing beside a quiet river on a moonlit night, you might understand what the Slavic peasant felt. That sense of something watching from the water. That whisper that might be wind or might be something else. That recognition of how quickly the boundary between life and death can dissolve. The Rusalka lives in that recognition, not as literal truth, but as metaphoric understanding of reality's reason struggles to acknowledge. She is both maiden and demon because reality itself contains such contradictions. She is both victim and killer because injustice creates cycles of harm. She is both beautiful and deadly because life and death are inseparable. And she dwells in water because water-like consciousness reflects everything while revealing nothing of its depths. The question posed at the beginning remains unanswered because it cannot be answered. Is the Rusalka drowned maiden or vengeful demon? The only truthful response is yes. Both. Always both. That is her nature and her power. That is why she haunts the Slavic soul across centuries. That is why she will not be forgotten,